Title asterisk. Everyone warned her about the cruel Duke, but on their wedding night he whispered, "Are you afraid of me?" I have known Aldrich Vane, the Duke of Crestthorne, for 23 years. I have watched him silence a room simply by entering it. I have seen men twice his age step back when he fixed them with that steady iron gaze. I have heard the whispers that followed him out of every ballroom in England, cruel, they said, merciless, a man carved from winter stone. I never corrected them. Not because the rumors were true, but because Aldrich never bothered to correct them himself, and I had learned long ago that he had his reasons for everything, even silence. What I could not have told you before the night of his wedding was what those reasons were. That I learned from watching Miss Wren Calloway. She arrived at Crestthorne Hall on a Tuesday morning in October, in a hired carriage that had seen better decades, wearing a gray traveling dress that had clearly been pressed within an inch of its life by someone who wanted very much to make the best of very little. I was standing in the forecourt when the carriage stopped. I had ridden out from London the day before at Aldrich's quiet request. "Come, Edmund, I would not have strangers filling my house for this." And I had obliged him because that is what 23 years of friendship will do to a man. The footman opened the door. She stepped down without assistance, which I noticed at once, because most young women in her position would have taken the offered hand with gratitude. She did not refuse it rudely. She simply did not require it. She was not what I had expected. The reports had said asterisk plain. They had said past her prime and the less favored of Calloway's daughters asterisk, which told you something about the quality of opinion among those who reported such things. She was perhaps 25, with dark hair pinned simply under a traveling bonnet, and eyes the color of old amber, the kind of amber that holds a small and perfect thing inside it, and does not let it go easily. She looked at Crestthorne Hall the way a person looks at something they have already decided not to be afraid of. I respected that immediately. "Miss Calloway," I said, coming forward, "I am Sir Edmund Harley, an old friend of the Duke's. He has asked me to welcome you." She turned those amber eyes to me. "He has not come himself." It was not an accusation. It was an observation, delivered with perfect composure, and it told me that she had already formed an expectation and was simply confirming it. "He will see you at dinner," I said. "He thought you might wish to rest after the journey." "That was considerate," she said, in a tone that suggested she was genuinely uncertain whether it was, and was reserving judgment. I liked her very much right then. She did not rest. I know because I was crossing the upper gallery an hour later when I heard the sound of pages turning in the library. I looked in. She was seated at the long table near the window, with 2 volumes open before her and a third in her hand, reading with the concentrated attention of someone who had learned to make the most of every quiet hour available to her. She did not look up when I entered. Then she said, without lifting her eyes from the page, "The library is extraordinary. He reads widely." "He does," I said. "That surprises people." She turned the page. "They expect a feared duke to have a room full of portraits of himself and very little else." "Do you expect that?" She looked up then. For a moment she was quiet, and I saw her weighing something. "I expect," she said carefully, "to marry a man I do not know, in a contract my father signed when he had no other option. I have been told very clearly who the Duke of Crestthorne is by everyone who has met him. I find it more useful to wait and observe for myself." "That is very wise," I said. "It is very necessary," she said, and went back to her book. "He came to dinner." I will say this for Aldrich, he was always exactly himself. He did not soften for company, but he did not perform cruelty either. He was simply present, contained, a man who took up space in a room without requiring the room to rearrange itself around him, because it always did so of its own accord. He entered the dining room and stopped when he saw her. She was standing near the window, still in the gray dress, because she had apparently not thought it worth changing for a dinner with a man who was to be her husband by morning. There was something in that which I think startled him, the absence of performance. Most women in her position would have worn their best. She had worn her honest. He crossed to her. She did not move back. "Miss Calloway," he said. His voice, for those who have not heard it, is low and carries without effort, the kind of voice that does not need to raise itself. "Your Grace," she said. He studied her for a moment. "Are you well? The journey was long," she said, "and I am perfectly well. I spent the afternoon in your library. I hope that was not an impertinence. Something shifted in his expression. Barely perceptible. I have known him long enough to read it, a kind of attention that he does not give easily. The library is yours to use, he said, as is the rest of the house. As of tomorrow morning, she said, with a very slight emphasis, and he looked at her again. This time the way a man looks at something he had expected to understand easily and finds, to his private interest, that he does not. Dinner was not warm. It was not cold either. It was the meal of two people measuring the distance between them with their eyes and trying to determine, without asking directly, whether it could be crossed. She ate with appetite and composure. She asked him once about the library's acquisition of a particular Latin text she had noticed. He answered with more detail than he likely intended. She listened with the quality of attention that makes a person feel, despite themselves, that what they are saying is worth hearing. I watched this and said nothing. The wedding was conducted the following morning in the estate chapel, with myself and the housekeeper as witnesses and a vicar who had clearly been told to make it brief. Wren Calloway walked to the altar in a cream wool dress that suited her better than it had probably suited its previous occasion, with her chin up and her hands steady. Aldrich stood at the front with the stillness of a man who has made a decision and made peace with it. He did not look at her the way a man looks at property. I know that look. I have seen it at enough society engagements. He looked at her the way a man looks at something that is unresolved, as though the question of her were still open, still turning in him, and he had not yet arrived at an answer. She said her vows clearly. He said his quietly and precisely, as though each word were being placed with care. When it was done, she turned to him. He turned to her. For a moment they simply looked at each other across the small distance that remained, and I thought of two countries whose border had just been redrawn and who were each deciding, privately, what kind of neighbor they intended to be. The wedding supper was better than the dinner before it. Whether this was the cook rising to the occasion or the occasion itself thawing slightly, I cannot say. Wren, I began to think of her as Wren, because her grace, the Duchess of Crestthorne, seemed, in my mind, to belong to a different woman than the one who had read Latin texts by a window in a gray dress. Spoke about her father's estate during better years, about a garden she had kept, about a particular autumn that she remembered very clearly because it was the last autumn before everything changed. She did not say when father lost everything or when we were ruined. She said the last autumn before everything changed asterisk, and the phrasing told you that she had thought about it long enough to arrive at language that held it without bitterness. Aldrich listened. He asked once about the garden. Roses, she said. Mostly climbers, they didn't require much, just something to hold on to. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "There are gardens here, they have been somewhat neglected. You may do with them as you like." She looked at him. "I would like that," she said, and I believe she meant it. I excused myself after supper under the pretext of correspondence to attend to, because I have never been a man who requires things to be explained to him twice. What I know of that evening, I know from Aldrich. He told me some of it in fragments over the months that followed, not in the manner of a man confessing, but in the manner of a man who has been carrying something and finds, in a trusted ear, a place to set it down. I have assembled the fragments here because I was there for enough of it to fill the gaps with confidence. She was in her rooms when he came to the door of the connecting chamber. He knocked. He did not open the door, he knocked and waited. After a moment, she opened it herself. She had changed from the wedding dress into a night robe, with her hair unbound, the dark hair loose over her shoulders, the amber eyes without the defense of public composure. She looked younger and somehow more herself. He stood in the doorway. He told me later that he had intended to say several things. He had prepared them, a quiet explanation of the arrangement, an assurance of her standing, a practical summary of what was expected and what was not. He was good at prepared remarks. He had been delivering them all his adult life. What he actually said was, "Are you afraid of me?" She was quiet for a moment. "They told me I should be," she said. "I know what they told you," he said. "I am asking what you believe." She looked at him for a long time. He let her. "I believe," she said slowly, "that a man who knocks before entering a room he has every legal right to enter is not a man who takes things by force. and I believe that a man who offers his wife a neglected garden before he has been married to her a full day is not a man without feeling. A pause. I believe that a man's reputation is made by those who fear him and is not always made correctly. He said nothing. Are you afraid of me? She said. He told me this was the question he had not prepared for, and that it had stopped him in a way that very few things had stopped him in 23 years of being the Duke of Crestthorne. Perhaps, he said finally, a little. She looked at him as though she were holding that sentence in both hands and turning it over carefully, examining every facet of it. That seems, she said at last, like a reasonable place to begin. They did not become an easy couple overnight. I want to be accurate about that because the truth of it is more interesting than a sudden softening. Aldrich was not a man built for easy warmth. He had learned very early that the world would reach for whatever a powerful man offered, and that it was simpler to offer very little. He did not lie and he did not pretend, but he had spent 20 years behind a controlled face, and controlled faces do not unfasten quickly. She did not try to unfasten it. That was, I think, the thing that reached him most. She settled into Crestthorne Hall the way a practical woman settles into an unfamiliar house. She learned the names of every servant within the first week. She began work on the neglected garden with quiet determination and excellent planning, and she read in the library every evening after supper, making no demands on his company, but making no effort to conceal her presence from him either. She was simply there, consistently, composedly, genuinely there, and he was a man who had not had anyone simply be there in a very long time. He began to linger after supper. Not dramatically. He did not announce it. He simply stopped leaving as quickly as he had left before. One evening I came in to find them both at the long library table, he with an estate ledger, she with a botany text, reading in the same silence with the easy quality of people who are comfortable enough not to fill it. I withdrew without being seen. I am not ashamed of this. Some things deserve a private moment. The winter was long and Crestthorne Hall was large, and there were, I have been told, a great many evenings of this kind. There were also evenings of a different kind. She found among the estate papers a record of a water dispute with a neighboring farmer that had been allowed to fester for 3 years. She brought it to him at breakfast. He looked at the record. He looked at her. She had already in the margins sketched a resolution. "You have been busy," he said. "It seemed wasteful," she said, "to let good land sit poisoned over a matter that could be settled in an afternoon." He studied the margin notes. She had a precise, economical hand. The resolution was elegant and fair and showed a clear understanding of both the legal position and the human one. "Were you educated beyond what is usual?" he asked. "My father was a great believer in education," she said, "before he was a great believer in poor investment." A slight pause. "I read everything available to me. It seemed the least wasteful thing I could do with the time." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Come with me this afternoon to the meeting." She looked up. "You would bring your wife to an estate dispute." "I would bring," he said carefully, "the person whose margin notes have improved on my position." He paused. "If she is willing." She was willing. The neighboring farmer, a weathered man named Jest who had been anticipating a fight, arrived at the estate office with his jaw set, and his son beside him, prepared clearly for the worst. He found the Duke seated with remarkable composure, and seated across from him, a quiet young woman who offered him a chair and poured him tea without any sense that this was remarkable, and then laid before him a proposal that was, he had to admit, fairer to him than anything he had expected from Crestthorne in 3 years. He looked at the Duke. The Duke said nothing. He looked at the woman. She said, "If you would like time to review it." "No," he said, and after a moment, "No, this will do." He shook hands with both of them and left. Outside, Wren said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "He was expecting you to be difficult." "I often am," Aldrich said. "You were not today." "No," he said. He paused, then more quietly, "I find I am somewhat less so of late." She looked at him. He met her eyes and then looked away, out across the winter lawns, and something in his profile was open, I think is the word. More open than I had seen it in years. Spring came. The garden at Crestthorne had not seen serious attention in 8 years. By March it was a tangle of ambition and neglect, Climbers grown unpruned over the old stone walls, beds choked with winter grass, a fountain at the center silted and still. She went at it with method and patience. Aldrich began to appear at the garden wall in the late afternoons. Not to assist, he never offered, and she never asked, but simply to observe in the way he observed most things, with that still, considering attention that seemed to take in more than it was willing to show. One afternoon in April, she said, without turning from the climbing rows she was training along the wall, "If you are going to stand there, you could hand me the twine." A pause, then his footsteps on the gravel path. He came and stood beside her, and handed her the twine when she reached for it, and held the cane steady when she needed it held, and said nothing, and she said nothing, and I am told it was very quiet and very warm and smelled of turned earth and old roses and early spring, and neither of them mentioned it at supper. But at supper he refilled her glass without being asked, and she thanked him with a small, precise smile, and I believe something was decided between them then without a word being said about it. There was an evening in May. I know this because I was visiting for a fortnight and was in the house when it happened, though not in the room. She had been writing letters at the library desk. He had been reading near the fire. The house was quiet. He said without any particular preamble, "Wren." She looked up. He was still looking at the fire. "I should tell you," he said, "that what you have done for this estate in 6 months, what you have done for the people on it, is more than has been done in the 3 years before you arrived." She set her pen down. She waited. "I was not," he said, "a good steward of this place after my wife died." A pause. The word *wife cost him something. I could hear it even through the door. "I managed it and I did not let it fail, but I was not present. I was not here in the way a man should be here." She said nothing, which was, I think, the right answer. "You are here," he said. "You are entirely here, and it has made a difference that I want you to know I have noticed." Silence. Then she said, "You are here too now," quietly. "I have noticed that as well." Another silence, longer. "I hope," he said even more quietly, "that you are not unhappy." "No," she said, and the word was simple and true. "I am not unhappy. I am surprised, perhaps. I came expecting something quite different. I found instead a man who knocks before entering and who holds rose canes in April and who is, underneath the reputation, rather more interested in fairness than the world gives him credit for." A pause. "That is not unhappiness. That is something else entirely." He turned from the fire then. I do not know what his face showed because I was in the corridor and not the room, and I am glad of it, because some expressions are not made for witnesses. What I heard was the sound of a chair, and then quiet. And then, after a long moment, very softly, her voice, "Aldrich." And his, "Yes." And nothing else, because that was enough. I left Cressthorne the following week. I had work in London, and in any case my purpose there had been fulfilled in ways I had not fully anticipated when I arrived. I had come as a witness to a contracted marriage. I had stayed for the beginning of something else. 6 months later I received a letter from Wren, from the Duchess of Cressthorne *, though it took me some time to align those two things into one woman, telling me that the fountain in the garden had been cleared and was running again, that the water dispute with Jest had been extended into a full land agreement that benefited both estates, that she had found in the library a second Latin text she had been looking for since she was 17, and that Aldrich had begun, in the evenings, to read aloud to her from the histories he favored, which she was finding more interesting than she had expected. She did not say, "I am happy." She was not that kind of woman. She said, "I find Cressthorne more than I had imagined, and I believe it finds me more than I had imagined, and I am grateful for the margin notes that led me here." I read it 3 times. Then I wrote back and told her the garden sounded very fine, and that I was glad she had found the Latin text, and that I would visit in autumn if she would have me. She wrote back, "Come in October. The climbers will be at their best." I have known Aldrich Vane for 23 years, and I can tell you exactly when I knew, when I was certain, beyond any remaining question, that he was happy. It was not the letter. It was not even the moment in the library doorway, which I will admit stayed with me. It was an afternoon the following spring, when I came to Cressthorne to find the 2 of them in the garden, she training the climbers along the south wall, he seated on the stone bench with a book open in his lap that he was plainly not reading, watching her with the steady, unhurried attention of a man who has found the thing he intends to look at for the rest of his life, and has no urgency about it, because he is not going anywhere. I stood at the garden gate for a long moment. She said something. I could not hear what. He answered, and then he laughed, a quiet sound, not performed, not offered to any room, only to her and to the spring air and the old stone walls and the roses coming in. I have not heard him laugh like that since before his first wife died. I closed the garden gate and went back inside, and did not interrupt them. Some things do not require a witness. They only require time.